Good morning, and thanks for joining us here on Treasure Coast Solutions every Wednesday from about 9 or so till whenever I run out of steam. We talk about things that affect you in your daily lives, some of the economic issues that may be happening nationally or internationally that may have an impact on you locally, or just some of the things that you may be you may want to keep an eye on, I guess is what is a good word. And some things you want to look at and what you might want to do and changes you might want to make. We're not a financial planning show. In fact, I understand there will be a new show on tomorrow that is more of the financial planning type thing with Denny Artachi. He's going to be in, and he'll be talking about some of those things. So if you're interested in that, that's where you want to go. We're going to talk about just some of the things that are taking place um, in the economy that ultimately will have an impact for us. Most of the time, we're talking about national issues or state issues or even local issues that are things that we think or I think that you might want to be watching out for, kind of cautious of some of the stuff that might be taking place. Um, and a lot of times there's of course, a number of different things that can that make an impact on Stewart, and sometimes we just don't think about them because we are, maybe we're focused on just what's going on here and not necessarily what's happening other places. But today, I do want to start a little bit with some local information, and I want to thank Kev Freeman. Kev is the development director for the city of Stewart, and so he keeps his eye on what's going on and what's happening, um, and I was had an opportunity to hear him speak for a few minutes last night at a Stewart Main Street meeting, and I had some concerns about some things because of maybe some of the some of the things that I thought might be coming up economically in the city as it relates to the number of rental units that were coming online, and some concern about do we have the capacity? Because a number of years ago, when New Urban built Azul and apartments in downtown Stewart, their focus group showed that the absorption rate for new apartments was about 10 per month. So they were a 46 or I think a 46 unit building. So they anticipated they would be completely leased up in about 4.5, 5 months. As it worked out, I don't think they still have completely leased out, and that's probably has something to do with their product, with the products that were available. They may have built, they may have built more larger units and should have gone with smaller units or lower cost units, but at the 2 bedroom range. But even ignoring all of that and looking at some of the things, you think, well, they didn't absorb it all. So what's going to happen now? Because I think Gil Smart had an article in the Stewart News relative to the number of units that are coming online and what's going to happen with these units, 1,200 apartment units or 13. And in fact, many people may know that part of the Costco project was an addition of some 396 apartment units that are going to be built or are scheduled to be built as part of that Costco project if it gets final approval. And then, of course, we have the apartments that are up north of town on US 1. I think there's 287 units there or something like that. And there's the ones coming online in Avonlea that I think there's some townhouses and apartments there, maybe a couple hundred to 240. And so you look at all of that, and my concern was, what's going to happen, and I know what economically is going to happen is if that market dries up, if there is no market for those rentals because it becomes oversaturated, those projects will lie dormant. So the economic impact of those won't be felt. We won't get the benefit of the tax dollars, and in fact, we actually will have a situation where maybe you end up with partially developed or undeveloped property. And of course, the city can't control that. The market controls really what happens. But it was a concern I had is what happens there. And then the second thought is, well, does that force, if we have a limited number of people looking for units and we have way more units, basic economics, if the supply of units is far greater than the demand for the units, price is going to go down. So that's going to force prices down. Naturally, the people who have the higher priced units, they're going to have to lower their price potentially, although it's impossible for them to cover debt service if they do that. So the thought was, well, they lower their price and then that forces a lower price to the next level. And then, the basic units, the price, it goes down even further. That's what you would think might happen, but because of financing issues and other things, some of those projects may not be able to reduce their price. They may just sit with vacant units, and then then you've got to worry about what kind of maintenance they have, what kind of taxes they're paying, and those kind of things. But one of the things that Kevin mentioned that was really pretty interesting is that I think there are 20,000 jobs in Stuart, 20,000 jobs, existing jobs. 17,000 of them are jobs that are people don't live in Stuart. So that's a huge demand. I mean, if you think about it, if there's that many jobs, there's probably a few hundred people or 1,000 people that would rather live in downtown Stuart, especially if they could afford it, than living in, maybe living in Palm City or St. Lucie County or Port St. Lucie or any of those places. So, so that may create a higher absorption because of a shift in desire for those jobs. Another thing that is kind of interesting is that we may also, the housing that we're looking at, not only is there a number of people out there who have jobs that might want to live in Stuart, but the housing itself and the construction of the housing and the subsequent people that locate there generate a significant amount of economic activity. As many of you know, people who work local tend to shop local, and then and people who and the shops that are local, they tend to reinvest those dollars into the community. They tend to whereas a lot of the big box places, that money tends to siphon out, and even though they may have a nice big location and employ some people here, a lot of times the profits go outside of the community. They go other places and they're dispersed out that way. Whereas with the local business owner, the profits that they make, they tend to spend back in the community, which has a multiplying effect on their dollar. So for every dollar that you spend at a local store, a local shop, downtown, restaurant, whatever, it's generally considered to have a 3 times multiplier. In other words, for every dollar you spend, it has a $3 economic benefit. Whereas if you spend money online or other places, you may have even a less than a $1 benefit because of money being extracted from the community. Even in the cases of online, even for salaries and wages and all kinds of things like that, you don't even get that benefit. So those are kind of things to think about. And it was interesting, and I want to give the city credit and Kevin for being on top of some of this and looking at these from a much broader range. A lot of times, sometimes government kind of just focuses on, what's on their plate at the time. And I like the fact that he was, he's looking at this, and the city is looking at this, including our city manager and our commission, at a much broader level, a much higher level, and looking at what's going on there. So that was pretty interesting, and it was interesting to see what's out there and what's being proposed, and what has already been approved, and that some of this stuff is pretty much already online. As many of you have seen around town, you can see some of these places. So yeah, it is it shows where we're at. The other thing that he had mentioned, and it's kind of interesting, is because you may have seen around the community, there seems to be a demand for storage units right now, and he was mentioning that there has been an economic pickup in that many people are either moving here and they're haven't decided where they're going to move yet, so they want to store their goods, or many of them have downsized to some degree or moved from a bigger place to a smaller place up here, and so they're looking for places to store until they decide what they want to do permanently, and that's an interesting thing that too as to what's going on. And then the last thing that I wanted to talk about locally was, I know the city right now is in the process of is looking at a couple development activities within the city. Uh, One of which I think is really pretty neat is the Seminole Street extension improvements, and it's really the Seminole Street improvements and the Osceola Street extension. But the one that's on the table right now is the Seminole, and it's going to be a really great project when they're done with it. It's going to create more of a walkable area behind on Seminole Street. Many of you don't may not even realize what Seminole is. That's that street that's closest to the river in downtown Stuart that nobody goes down because it looks like an alley. This won't look like an alley anymore. And then, of course, there's properties that are already being developed. Some of the stuff has already been torn down, is being redeveloped, and there's, I think, George Hart's putting 30 condos there at Sailfish Cove, and that whole area back there is going to be kind of redeveloped with, like I say, more walkability and more access, and that's going to be really good for the city, and it's going to kind of move out into where St. Lucie Avenue comes in there at the end of Seminole, and where Osceola ends now, and then at some point the goal is to take um, Osceola and kind of take it across and make it more pedestrian friendly and move it on down past what is existing as which is currently the courthouse. I mean, the city hall, and move past city hall down past Mulligan's parking lot. They've agreed to make some redesign changes, and they're going to be some redesign there, so that it's going to be a little better, flows a little easier, and then of course it would move on down towards the Flagler Center, and there would be some development of the park down there, more activities for kids, for adults. More water activities to get more usage out of our waterfront and more access to the waterfront. So that project is actively being worked on. Pinal and in the CRA has been coordinating that, and I think has done a great job, and the city has done a great job in terms um, of what they're doing there. The seems like the only thing that is difficult to figure out at this point is kind of what to do with trash, but which seems like a mundane subject, but at the same time, it's very difficult to figure out what you're going to do for those shops down there on Seminole. As you try to make that a nicer place, you don't really want it lined with dumpsters. From the other standpoint, you don't want people hauling their trash 3 blocks to throw it into a dumpster either, because A, it's inconvenient, but B, it's going to end up in a mess at some point because those bags don't always make it. So that's kind of a little sticky thing. I think they've got some temporary solution there, but long term, that's an issue that's going to have to be addressed in a city when you're trying to make it more accessible. When it's near the water, you want to make it more walkable. You have to try to address that issue. And some of the cities have used underground trash. That there's an investment in that costs some money, but again, they are going to, as part of the Seminole extension, one of the things they will accomplish is underground on the utilities. So that'll be great. It'll take a lot of those utilities out of there and put them underground and make it a lot nicer to walk. So you don't, and a lot more visual and open without wires hanging and things like that. So that's pretty cool. And I think the city's really on top of that, and they're doing a really good job of what they're doing there. And they can open that up, and maybe some additional shops will open there on the riverside. We already have Colorado Inn, uh, where they have preserved some old houses and have made it part of the inn. They're down there at the end of Seminole. So I think it'll be really something, and it's a really neat project that they got on line for that. So um, the and then, like I said, I'm excited about the preliminary plans for the Osceola Street extension, because it will provide a more seamless access to Flagler Park and the waterfront. And that's one of the things that, probably the top thing that makes the city what it is the fact that it has access to the water and it's on the water, and all of the things that provides. But we haven't really been able to produce a lot of active water use, and even to a large degree, there's not a lot of, there's a park there at Flagler, which is really nice, but there wasn't in the past a lot of activity. Now we have some things going. And I think that, like I say, with this extension, there's talk about making kind of making it go past the Stewart Feed Store and back into the Flagler Center. And there would be an area down there for entertainment that would have a larger area than the Riverwalk stage. So we'd have more area to spread out and have, maybe bigger groups that can come in. There's an opportunity for a splash pad down there for the younger kids. Definitely more things that we have for families in town. And so there's an opportunity for that. And there's also an opportunity to put in and update the park equipment there. The Kiwanis Club of Stewart did an excellent job of updating the park there at Woodlawn, and it's fantastic. In fact, to the point that it's now almost so busy that we really need a second space, because that park has been tremendously well received, and of course it's designed to allow for more access by handicapped and others who may not be able to usually experience a traditional park and traditional park equipment. And now they've done a tremendous job, and putting up the shade structures and all the shelters there has been fantastic. So, I think there's a lot of things coming, and I think there are a lot of things that are positive for Stewart, and a lot of things that I think it makes a whole lot of sense for Stewart to do to create a vibrant community that has a place for people to live and work and create tax dollars and jobs, so that we can support all of that, and that the city can remain the nice community that is, and the award-winning community that is. But anyway, so that's what's going on with some of that. So I wanted to talk a little bit about it and what's going on there with and so I know some people have seen some construction and have wondered, gee, are we going crazy? And we're really not. Really, what we're doing is, like I said, creating uh, living places for people who currently have jobs not with the city, but in the city, have jobs in the city, whether that be at the hospital or or it's just in some of the local businesses that they can have the opportunity to live close to their job. That helps with transportation and a lot of other things that will that will help lessen the impact on the environment and on our rivers and waterways. So I think it's really kind of promising. Yeah, the other thing, we haven't heard a lot about some things that we were talking a lot about before, like Brightline and the train stations and those kind of things. But my understanding is that some of those things are still on the table. Brightline still is interested in, of course, they're finishing up the extension. So, they are going through with what they're building. And, that's, as you can see, because they've been doing some work here in town, it's eventually it'll connect, and, we'll have the connection. But the opportunity to have a stop is really, for us, the difference between a project that has a positive impact versus a project that's going to have a significant negative impact with no positive outcome. And so I think that they want to put a train station in Stewart. I think it's a good location. They've looked at 4 locations, all of which I think, are decent locations. Uh, One of the things about the Brightline project is that when they come into a community, they also develop some stuff. So there's an opportunity for them to come in and create some jobs, and to create some entertainment, and to create some things, and possibly some infrastructure for Stewart, including maybe parking, or access to easier access to the hospital or whatever. There's a lot of different things that they can do there, and so they're looking at a number of different things. And from my standpoint, I like the old. I remember that the train station was downtown, and it was really kind of neat to have it downtown. It's nice if it can be there where it's gonna you can get off and you can go to Riverwalk on a Sunday, or if you live here and you live in the Azul apartments or one of these new apartments coming online, you don't have to get in your car, drive. You can walk in, catch a train, and go up to Orlando, or go down south for watch a ball game, or do whatever you're going to do. So it's kind of convenient, kind of neat. And so that's still out there. And then also, I think that City Hall and the movement of City Hall is still out there. As you know, they've purchased the Wells Fargo building, so that at this point, City Hall would be moving down to the Wells Fargo building, which I think is good. It'll stretch the city a little bit, but it keeps the offices in the core, which is nice. If you move the offices outside of the core, it could have really affected downtown. But I think this will stretch the historic downtown rather than causing it to collapse. I think it'll create more of a government area, which will be down by the courthouse. And there's a lot of law offices down there, and a lot of professional offices, and I think that'll create a very nice environment down there, including with the park. And we have some arts with the Arts Council down there. I think there's some real positives that could come there, and depending on what happens with the growth around it, and the Creek District, and some of the things that are happening there, we'll see what's going on. But there's a lot of good things happening that I think should mean good things for the people that live and pay taxes in Stewart, because as that tax base gets bigger, it's not going to put as much of a burden on you as a resident if you own property. So if we can get to the point where there is jobs and economic activity created, and they're producing revenue to cover some of this, whether it's sales tax, real estate taxes, or other forms of taxes that might exist, fees or whatever. At least as much of that, more of that will fall on a bigger tax base, which means that we, as a percentage, individually, wouldn't have to bear as big of a tax burden. So anyway, I think that's what generally we're looking at here in the short run. So things are really kind of positive as long as the economy stays good, Florida stays good, we don't lose too many businesses. I am concerned that I think there are something like 14 million people is the latest number I heard, which was down, but there are 14 million people that are three months or more past due on their rent, and that the average amount is roughly $6,000 per person. Now, that's a big problem, because if they're not paying their rent, possibly because they don't have a job, but they're not paying their rent, that means that the landowner, the landlord, can't pay their rent. I mean, their mortgage and their costs, because most of these large projects where they're rentals are not owned. There's debt involved in it. In fact, a lot of them have debt or returns that they have to produce for investors, and so that's a real concern, because there was nothing in the coronavirus package for rentals. They got, I think, purposely left out of that process, so that if you were in that market, whether it be commercial, in the commercial rental market, where you rented commercial offices, which of course you're struggling potentially because everybody's going home with to quarantine and nobody's wanting to rent office space. Um, or you're talking about even individual residential units. People have taxes to pay and maintenance fees to pay, and they have interest and principal on their loans to pay, and that makes it very, very difficult to keep up with all of that. So, um, so that's I think probably our biggest crisis right now, because unless something happens there, we could see a a significant amount of foreclosures, and as many of you know, that foreclosure market damages the regular housing market by pulling prices down. If we dump a lot of, and it affects, of course, appraised values, which affects the ability to sell your house, because if somebody's going to buy it and have a loan, the house isn't going to appraise out. So we have to be a little bit concerned about what's happening there, and that's at a crisis standpoint. A number of restaurants are at a crisis standpoint. They need to, the question as to whether that they can survive. That's a big issue, and something that people are looking at, particularly since many of the restaurants, particularly here in Florida, are designed to be restaurants where you eat in. And so, there we have a lot of very nice restaurants, a lot of very high end restaurants, but those restaurants can't survive on takeout. They require that somebody's coming in, having a few drinks, having an appetizer, meeting some friends or whatever, and spending a little money. And a lot of it is, I hate to say it, but a lot of it is impulse buying. If I'm calling in to do a takeout, I go online, look at the menu, figure out what I want, and I order specifically what I want, and that's what I get, right? But how many times when you go to a restaurant and you're there in person and you're looking through the menu because you haven't had to go online and look at the menu, now you say, oh, that sounds good. Maybe I'll just try that too. So I'll get this as an appetizer, and I probably should, and then I'll get this as the main meal, and then I probably should have some kind of salad, because I at least need to pretend like I'm eating right. And so next thing you know, you got a drink, maybe you got two because they're having 2 for 1, which is really not 2 for 1. It's two that you're paying almost the same price as two. But anyway, so the bottom line is you got a bill that suddenly is $100, $150, or $200 instead of $75. And of course, the tip is not nearly as big. I hate to say it, but I think there's a lot of people out there that don't have any problem with stiffing somebody on a tip for carry out or pickup. And I mean that not in a really horrible way, but I think a lot of people have the thought that if you're not providing me any service, that if I'm coming and picking up my food, there's no reason to tip. Well, that's a huge impact on the servers, because if the business goes 60 or 50 or 70% takeout, I would be willing to bet that those tips go down. Now, there are some people that have been really good in the community about recognizing that these people live off this money and that they can't live off of, the base wage. They live off their tips, and have actually tipped more than they usually would, or tipped in situations that they normally wouldn't tip. And I think that's great. I think it's great to give back and do those kind of things. If you can afford to do that periodically, you should. But there are also a lot of people who come in, pick up their stuff. They've maybe already paid for it, or they're ordering it online, and they're just picking it up and going. And so, unfortunately, that's a big loss. And you say, well, that affects the servers. How does that affect the restaurant? Well, for one thing, you have good employees that can't make a living anymore, so they end up leaving or doing something else, and that's a problem. And so that's an issue. Plus, um, if there are no tips to hire somebody, you're going to have to give them additional money. You're going to have to pay them more, or supplement their income, or do something to continue to hold it, because many of those people, that especially the ones that work at the high end restaurants, they make good money off of the tips, but that they have to live off of that. That is a job that is designed to provide a livable wage. Maybe if you're working at McDonald's, that job is not designed to be the job that feeds a family of four. It just isn't ever going to be that. But some of these restaurants where they're 5-star restaurants and things, the tips are pretty nice, and people can make a few $1,000s. So so that's kind of some of the stuff that's going on there that I wanted to talk about. I wanted to mention as a little follow up. I did get one of the things that we look at Stewart Main Street, and we look at other places, is is historic preservation, and some of that is in the is in the form of uh, preserving buildings or or activities. Um, that's part of historic preservation, things that we've always done, and maybe kind of keep that alive so that history of those activities. But a lot of it's is relative to real estate, historic properties. We don't really, and I'm thankful for it, we don't have a real hard nosed historic preservation policy. We do have one, and it pretty much is an effort to keep or to maintain some of the old stock that exists in Stewart. Um, and I know, some people say, well, we can have newer and better, but some of the things that make a small town unique, as opposed to like New York City, for example, is that we do have a mix of different things. We still have some older properties where people have modified them and are using them for something else. Maybe it was an old commercial building that they're now trying to turn into residential, and live in that, or apartments. Or maybe it's a building that used to house one kind of business, like a construction business, and now it's being repurposed to be used as a restaurant or a takeout restaurant or whatever. Um, and if we can do that and maintain that, and get some benefit out of it, and still have some economic benefit, so the property doesn't go in disarray or and get uh, in disrepair, then I think it's a good thing. And we have I want to give a shout out to a couple people that I think have done a really good job of taking and preserving some of our history here in Stewart, and making money at it. And one is Stephen Vitale and Otto Vitale on the Colorado Inn. As many people know, the Colorado Inn itself is a very small building, but uh, they own a lot of these little houses that they've preserved, that they've moved from other locations to downtown, and those now are little bungalows that you can rent, and it's amazing. You can come in here. They've done some work on them, try to fix them up, but but you can see this nice little old historic house that was maybe built in the 20s or maybe in the 30s, which for us is very historic. That's the other thing that you have to realize here. If you're from Boston or from New York, it's there's nothing at all to see buildings that were built in the 1700s and in the 1800s, but especially in the 1700s and that kind of thing. Here in Stewart, the first home I think was built in 1898 or something, so almost the 1900s. So a building isn't even, is barely over 100 years old, 120 years old. Now, we don't necessarily up north think of those um, as being old, but because of the growth we have here in Florida, if we don't make an effort other than the Nord, or if we allow the market to determine completely and don't make an effort to try to preserve them in some manner, they will go away, because the growth is such that land will become more valuable than the building, and they'll be torn down. And um, and then at that point we don't really have any history. I know when I was looking before at an opportunity to try to figure out, try to build something that looked like historic Stewart, something that was, you could look at the architecture and say, this is Stewart. There's really not a lot of that. First of all, there's a wide range of stuff that was built in Stewart, depending upon the year and the years. And second of all, a lot of that stuff has gone away. And so it hasn't been preserved. So if you're interested in those kind of things, there is a list of historic properties that's in the Stewart Feed. The Stewart Historical Society has a book. It shows pictures of the properties. They're indexed, and you can go in and look everything, and they're kind of from the oldest to the youngest type situation. So I think it's kind of cool. But I wanted to do that shout out to the Vitales who have done the an amazing job of preserving property and making it worthwhile and making Stewart kind of cool, because that's places where people can rent. So we look at, from my standpoint, would I rather have, would you rather have a high rise, a 3 or 4 story apartment? I mean, hotel, or would you rather have some of these little bungalows that people can come and rent for a week, rent for a day, rent for a month, through VRBO or something like that? And I think that's really a lot. It makes us more unique, because then when the person does come in here and rents, and they're walking downtown, they're not walking past one sterile building after another, but they're walking past the Blue Door and walking past the hair salon that's there, and they're walking past the building that used to be the dentist's office, and all of those kind of things that add to the quaintness of the town and make people say, yeah, I want to come back there, or maybe I'd even want to live there. So I like that. I think that's neat, and I think we need to continue to stay on that. So I wanted to mention them. The other person I want to mention is an individual named Anna Trotter, who moved here recently from Paris. She had been familiar with the community and lived in the community for a short period of time. She was a boater originally. So that, when you're thinking about the boat show, for example, and how disruptive it is, keep in mind that that generates a lot of economic activity. And it's not always just the next day or the next year, or, it sometimes is maybe 10 years later or 15 years later. People that have traveled the world come to these shows, and at some point in life, they may decide, you know what, I don't want to live on my boat anymore. I want to live someplace. So they think back over all the places they've been, and they say, well, I don't want to live in West Palm, and I don't want to live in Seattle. And, boy, Stuart, Florida was a cool place. Let's go look at that. And it generates a lot of activity. Not only does it generate activity for our boat builders, but it does generate activity for people who, want to make a home here. And Anna kind of did that. And she and some of people know Mike Braid and Marie Braid. They own a number of rental properties in town, which are really, most of them are older buildings that they fixed up or preserved, and they're using them as rentals. And but Anna bought this old house that was built in 1928, and it was in some disrepair, needed some work done, but it had good bones, as they say. And she's come in, and she has, with Marie Braid, and they have completely renovated that house. They've redone the inside, updated it, but they've moved it back to the way it looked in the original design. They've pulled off all the shutters that were on there, and I mean the tile that was on there, and gone back to the wood clapboard sides. They've sanded all that. They're repainting everything. They've tried to maintain as much of the old style as they can, including the floors and the cypress and some things that are in there. They opened the porch up. The porch was closed in with jalousie windows. They've opened that up now, so it's a big kind of a semi wraparound porch. It's an amazing what she's doing there. They're not completely finished. She put a new roof on, a metal roof. She's put a metal roof on the apartment next door. They're repainting the apartment next door that they also own. That's part of there. It's a garage apartment. And I think she's done a tremendous job. And for somebody who's not really even in the community to come into this community and to preserve that piece of property is just amazing. And so if you get a chance, it's a little piece of property on the corner of Detroit and Osceola. It used to be what I called the greenhouse, because I used to live in it, but and it was kind of a faded out green. It was originally, when I think it was originally built, it might have been pink, but it's really nice. She's not completely finished with it, but if you have a chance to be driving by Osceola, or you're down Detroit, which is a one-way street, by the way, so pay attention. And if you happen to go in there, take a look at what she's done. And there's a situation where that property, with what she's done on it, and the amount she's substantially increased the economic value of that property. That property is unique because there are not many homes like that are within 2 blocks of the downtown, that you can just walk down there and that you're almost in downtown to start with. So anyway, I want to kind of commend her and recognize what she and Marie and Mike have done in terms of, kind of helping with that and encouraging that. I think that's a fantastic thing. And it's just great also to see somebody come into a community like this and embrace it like she has in terms of wanting to preserve some of its history. So uh, there's a couple things I wanted to, those are some of the things I wanted to talk about that are happening locally here, some of the things that are taking place. And it's, it's some of it's history, some of it's economic, but it just goes to show that we can sometimes, have both. We can have a little bit of the old without, destroying it all for new. Um, and so when we get that opportunity, and I think we have a responsibility to go through and pick properties that and pick things that the city wants and needs to, as a group, preserve. I think that there's a need to do that. And so anyway, I'm excited about that. I think that's kind of neat. And as I think maybe some of you may have heard earlier this morning when Evan and I were on this morning, we also moved the old Walton building last night, and it is sitting where it's ultimately going to go. Right now. There's some there's some additional things that need to be to plumbing and electric and all the things, and then the building will be is right now on will be dropped about 17 inches. It's just over the spot where it's going. The foundation's all in and everything's ready to go. So it's done, ready to go. And we just now need to start fixing it all up. But it's going to be neat. Nice addition, I think, to the city. Makes that street look good. It's tucked in the trees. It gives you something to look at that's quaint. And, it's great that we've got the apartments across the street. I don't think it would be quite the same if we had apartments on one side of the street and apartments on the other, and you're sitting in an apartment looking at somebody out at the apartment. If I'm having an apartment, like the Azul, and I'm, looking out over, a little restaurant, a historic restaurant, instead of a parking lot or instead of another 4-story building, 3-story building. I think it's kind of neat, and I think that's what adds to the charm. Just like it kind of fits in nice when you've got the old Methodist church that's still around over there that's being used. It's been preserved and used. You've got the old Victorian that's there, which is, I think, the third oldest property in Stewart. It's right there on the corner of Albany and Joan Jefferson, right behind the Basil Tie, which is also an older piece of property that's been, was probably built in 34. And even the apartments that are next to it, which are, kind of plain apartments, but were built in the 40s. So it's kind of neat that you've got some of these things that give it some age, and then right there with the Azul apartments, which are really nice and new and all of that. So I think that's kind of cool. Other than that, I think that I did want to talk about some of those and how that's had an impact on the city, and particularly this apartment issue. And I do want to thank Kev Freeman for his presentation at Stewart Main Street, and also just for the fact that the city is on top of these things, and some of the projects they're working on, the CRA, some of the projects they're working on are fantastic. So I think that's really really kind of neat, and making an effort to to do as much as they can to generate some positive economic activity in the city. Other than that, the only other thing I want to do is kind of go to maybe because we're running out of time, but I want to go to, maybe 40,000 feet and look at something a little bit different. We've been talking about Stewart itself, and I think that's good. It's always good to bring back some of the local economics and talk about some of those things. But one of the things that I want you to think about, and we'll probably talk about a little bit more on the next show, but is we kind of have been so focused here in the United States on the United States, the coronavirus, the political environment, all of the things that are taking place has caused us to focus on the United States as if the United States is a little world by itself, and we're not paying as much attention economically to what's going on in Europe and in the Far East. And we are dependent, our economies are intertwined. Now, our US economy has become a little bit more independent, but we're still intertwined with Europe and with and with Russia and China and with Japan and some of those kind of things. And those places are suffering. Their economies are bad. China's been able to hide it through some, things they do with currency and some things they do with other aspects of their economy that you don't always hear about. They don't have to release data, so you don't always hear it. But they're hurting. France and Germany are hurting. Great Britain is hurting to a large degree. All of these countries have been, Italy, all of these countries have been impacted by this coronavirus equal to or greater than the United States. And there's a lot of political garbage that goes on, but we've done pretty well economically versus some of these other countries. And we're dependent upon those countries for a portion of the world economy that we have to support and we have to get our share of. We can't ignore. So we can't just say, well, we don't care what happens in Germany. We don't have to care what happens in France. We do need to. And the other thing that we need to be aware of is that there's been a shift recently of companies that are delisting from the stock exchange. And what that means is they're generally doing one or two things. They're going to another exchange. So some of them have delisted so that they can go into a different regulatory body than the SEC. And so they've gone off into the international markets, and others have delisted to potentially go private so that they could avoid all that. But in general, there's many of them that are moving more towards international instead of the U.S., which includes how they're handled from an accounting standpoint and a regulatory standpoint. And to a large degree, London has become, and Great Britain has become, that base of accounting and financial, and the U.S. is starting to lose some of that. So anyway, I just wanted you to be aware that we need to start economically, we need to start focusing a little bit on what's going on internationally, because we don't live in a vacuum. We think we do. We kind of acted like we do recently, but we really don't. And we're going to have to start focusing on that and be aware of what could potentially be coming down to us. So we'll talk about that next Wednesday maybe and in the future. And again, if you ever have want to call in, 220-9788. That's the number for us, and that's the number for the other shows here on WSTU. Catch Denny Artachi tomorrow. His show gets started, and that'll be an interesting show if you're interested in some financial planning. And thanks for joining me here on Treasure Coast Solutions every Wednesday from 9 to 10 o'clock right here on WSTU Digital 1450, Martin County's very, very, very old station.